Before he was a legend carved into the stone of history, he was a man. Before gold and silver paved the halls of his palace, he felt the crushing weight of a promise, a legacy, and a divine destiny. This is not the tale of a king ascending his throne to the roar of a jubilant crowd, but the story of a soul entrusted with a sacred duty, a glorious burden too heavy for mortal shoulders to bear alone. Solomon, heir to the throne of the great David, did not simply place a crown of pure gold upon his head. He shouldered the responsibility for an entire chosen people. In that hallowed moment, as the holy oil was anointed upon his brow, he felt not the thrill of power, but the tremor of a covenant with the Almighty. He stood amidst the acclamations of his people, yet within his soul there was a solemn silence. He saw the shadow of his father, a warrior, a poet, a king who had erred, yet always found his way back to God. David's legacy was not just a unified kingdom, but a profound lesson in the frailty and greatness of man before God. The world would come to know him as the wisest, the wealthiest, the most magnificent of kings. Rulers from distant lands would journey for months just to hear his words. Caravans laden with treasures would form endless lines to his city gates. His name would become synonymous with prosperity and justice. But has anyone ever asked, what is the price of such unparalleled wisdom? What happens when a mortal man is granted blessings that rival heaven itself? This story is not a heroic epic, but a cautionary tale whispered across millennia. It is a warning that even the most brilliant light can be obscured by the very shadows it casts. For when one stands too high, the ground below becomes distant, and the humble voice of an early faith can be drowned out by the echo of one's own glory. How can a mortal man bear the heavens upon his earthly shoulders and not be broken? Solomon's journey, from a humble youth pleading for discernment to an old king lamenting all that is vanity, is the tragic answer to that question. This is the story of a soul who was given everything, only to realize that the one thing that truly mattered was the very thing he had slowly let slip away. In the hallowed stillness of the Gibeon night, under a sky glittering with stars like diamonds scattered on black velvet, the young king entered a fateful dialogue that would forever alter his life and the course of Israel's history. As his kingdom slept, Solomon presented 1,000 burnt offerings, an act born not of empty ritual, but of a heart desperate to connect. And in the depths of a dream, the voice of God came to him, not as a thunderclap from a mountain, but as a gentle whisper, probing the very foundation of his soul. Ask for whatever you wish, and I will give it to you. It was an offer without limits, a blank check signed by the creator of the universe. A mortal man, especially a young king, might have been blinded by the infinite possibilities. He could have asked for unending wealth, to build an empire beyond compare, for an immortal life to rule forevermore, or for the annihilation of his enemies who dared challenge his throne. These earthly desires, like serpents, lie always in wait to strike at the heels of the powerful. But Solomon, in this purest moment of his soul, was not tempted. He saw himself not as a monarch, but as a child, given a task far too great for his years. He felt the weight of millions of souls, a people he was called to lead, to judge, and to protect. His own inadequacy became profoundly clear before the magnitude of his mission. With a voice of earnest sincerity, he replied, "O Lord my God, you have shown great kindness to my father David, and now you have made me king in his place. But I am only a little child, and do not know how to carry out my duties. Your people here are so great, a people too numerous to count or number. Grant your servant, therefore, a listening and discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" That prayer moved heaven. It was not a plea for power, but an act of complete surrender. It was the recognition that true wisdom does not originate from the human mind, but is a gift that must be bestowed. It was not a tool for domination, but a responsibility for service. And God responded, not merely with approval, but with delight. Since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. Solomon awoke, but the dream did not fade. A new clarity flooded his mind. The world seemed sharper, the intricate connections between people and events laid bare before him like a map. He had received the greatest of gifts, but with it came an unspoken condition: to walk in the ways of the Lord. This gift was a double-edged sword. It could build a righteous kingdom, but it could also expose the emptiness of a world without God. Solomon's prayer was not a distant promise. It bore fruit with breathtaking immediacy, its echo resounding through the kingdom like a divine proclamation. His intellect was no longer merely human. It was as sharp as a divine blade, slicing through every layer of falsehood to touch the core of truth. It was not long before this heavenly wisdom was put to a public and dramatic test in a case no earthly law could resolve. Two women, their faces etched with grief and desperation, were brought before his throne. They shared a home, and both had recently given birth. But tragedy had struck in the night. One of the infants had died. Now, both women wept, each pointing to the living child, claiming him as her own. One lie, one truth, shrouded in bitter tears and mutual accusation. The court officials were baffled. There were no witnesses, no evidence, only the conflicting words of two heartbroken mothers. The entire court fell silent as Solomon listened intently to their pleas. His gaze was steady, looking past their tears, seemingly into the very depths of their souls. After a long moment of contemplation, he issued a command that sent a shockwave of horror through the hall. "Bring me a sword," the young king ordered, "and divide the living child in two. Give half to the one and half to the other." A collective gasp swept the room. Courtiers exchanged bewildered glances, wondering if their young king had lost his mind. But Solomon's expression remained serene. He was conducting a test not of law, but of love. He knew that while laws could be manipulated, a mother's heart could not lie. Instantly, the true mother cried out, her heart feeling the phantom pain of that sword. "Please, my lord," she begged, "give her the living baby. Don't kill him." The agony of losing her child to another was far less than the agony of seeing him harmed. The other woman, however, her heart hardened by jealousy and loss, callously replied, "Neither I nor you shall have him. Cut him in two." In that single defining moment, the truth was laid bare for all to see, clearer than any testimony. Solomon pointed to the first woman. "Give the living child to her," he declared. "She is his mother." News of this judgment spread throughout Israel, and the people held their king in awe. They saw not just a clever ruler, but the very presence of God acting through him. Solomon's wisdom became a living legend. Yet, with every echo of that wisdom, with every paean to his intellect, another step was added to the staircase that lifted him higher and higher, further away from the common people he ruled. Greatness brings admiration, but it also brings a profound isolation. He could see into the hearts of others, but who could see into the burden of his own? The more extraordinary he became, the more different he felt. And in that distinction, a seed of pride, however small, began to sprout. Solomon's kingdom entered its golden age. Peace reigned across the borders, and prosperity flowed like a river in flood season. The king's focus now turned to building, to forging a legacy in stone and gold that would endure for generations. He embarked upon two monumental projects, twin structures that would stand as parallel symbols of his life and his soul. The first was the Temple of the Lord, For 7 years, the most skilled artisans from across the known world converged on Jerusalem. Precious cedar logs from Lebanon were floated down the sea. Massive stones were perfectly hewn at the quarry, so that not a single hammer blow or iron tool was heard at the sacred construction site. Every detail, from the walls overlaid with pure gold to the 2 magnificent bronze pillars named Jachin and Boaz, was crafted with reverence and meticulous care. It was a dwelling place worthy of the presence of the Almighty, a testament to Solomon's devotion. When the Ark of the Covenant was finally brought into the most holy place, the glory of the Lord descended as a thick cloud, so overwhelming that the priests could not stand to perform their service. The heart of the nation was unified in a single place of worship. But alongside the temple, another structure arose, one that took even longer to complete: Solomon's own palace. For 13 years the work continued, a testament to his escalating wealth and power. It was a magnificent complex, including the House of the Forest of Lebanon with its soaring cedar columns, the Hall of Pillars, and the Hall of the Throne, where he administered justice. Everything was adorned with gold, silver, and ivory. The articles in his household, from the shields of his guards to his drinking cups, were made of pure gold. Silver, in those days, was considered of little value. Solomon's palace was a wonder of the ancient world, a place where luxuries seemed to know no bounds. Yet, as the years passed, its gleaming walls became less a symbol of blessing and more of a gilded cage. Wealth began to create an invisible chasm between the king and his people. He lived in a world of perfection and opulence, insulated from the daily struggles of those he ruled. Luxury began to dull the edge of his early humility. The king's focus, almost imperceptibly, shifted from the giver of the gifts to the gifts themselves. He began to look upon these great works and see his own reflection. He saw his wisdom in their design, his power in their scale, and his wealth in every glittering detail. The palace, instead of a place from which to serve, became a monument to his own greatness. And in that quiet self-admiration, the walls of the gilded cage grew ever thicker, separating him not just from the world outside, but from the humble voice within his own soul. To fortify a kingdom, political wisdom is essential. Solomon, with the intellect God had given him, understood this better than anyone. He knew that military might could secure a temporary peace, but that lasting alliances forged through marriage could ensure stability for decades. It was a strategic art of diplomacy, and he was its grandmaster. Delegations from around the world came to Jerusalem, drawn not only by tales of his wisdom, but also to seek alliances. These pacts were often sealed with a royal wedding. The first and most significant was with the daughter of Pharaoh, a bold political move that secured Israel's southern border. Then came princesses from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and the land of the Hittites, neighboring nations that could be either formidable threats or valuable allies. Each marriage was a political triumph, another brick in the great wall of peace. But each new wife brought with her not just a dowry and an entourage, but also her own faith and her own gods. Whispers of Chemosh, the war god of Moab, of Molech, the dreadful deity of the Ammonites demanding terrible sacrifice, and of Ashtoreth, the fertility goddess of the Sidonians, began to creep through the polished corridors of the royal palace. At first, Solomon viewed it as a matter of cultural respect, a necessary concession to maintain harmony in his harem and stability in his foreign relations. He allowed his wives to keep their faiths, to build small altars in their private quarters. He told himself that his own heart was steadfast, that his devotion to the Lord God of Israel was unshakable. He believed his wisdom could manage these foreign influences, treating them as political factors rather than spiritual threats. But love has a subtle power. The pleas of a beloved wife, the tears of a homesick princess, the delicate requests to worship as their ancestors had, these were invisible but relentless pressures upon the king's heart. Each whisper was a seed of compromise, sown into the fertile soil of a heart growing accustomed to luxury and power. The Lord's explicit command, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods," began to feel less like an absolute edict and more like a piece of advice. Solomon, the wisest of men, began to deceive himself. He thought he could contain the fire, not realizing that even the smallest spark could eventually consume the entire forest. The king who could discern the truth in others' hearts was becoming blind to the slow, creeping falsehood in his own. The fracture in Solomon's soul was not a sudden break, but a slow, corrosive process, like a single drop of water wearing away stone over time. On the surface, his devotion seemed intact. He was still the one who presided over the grand festivals at the temple, offering thousands of sacrifices in the sight of all Israel. The prayer he offered on the day of the temple's dedication was one of the most eloquent and humble ever uttered, a profound declaration of God's greatness and man's smallness. He had asked God to hear the prayers not only of his people, but of the foreigner who came to this holy place. But in the hidden corners of his private life, another reality was taking shape. To please his foreign wives, whom he had grown to love, he permitted them to build high places, altars on the hills surrounding Jerusalem, so they could worship the gods of their homelands. At first, he merely observed from a distance, an act of political tolerance. But then, perhaps attending a festival for a favorite wife, he stood among them. Then, perhaps he offered a pinch of incense, not out of belief, but as a gesture of respect. Each small act of compromise was another chisel blow against the foundation of his faith. The heart that had once singularly pleaded for discernment to serve one God was now tragically divided. One half still belonged to the covenant with the Lord of Israel, to the magnificent temple and the sacred law. But the other half was pulled toward the pleas of earthly love, the demands of diplomatic alliances, and the exotic allure of strange rituals. He became a king of two worlds, trying to stand with one foot on two pieces of land that were drifting ever further apart. This was the quietest, deepest tragedy. The fall did not begin with an open act of rebellion, but with a heart that was no longer wholly devoted. His wisdom remained. He could still solve the nation's complex problems and compose profound proverbs. But that wisdom was now unmoored from its moral anchor. It became an intellectual tool rather than an expression of faith. He knew what was right, but he no longer possessed the undivided strength of will to do it completely. A kingdom cannot stand if its king's heart is divided. The schism in Solomon's soul was a prophecy of the schism that would soon tear apart the very nation he had built. The fire on the Lord's altar still burned, but strange fires on the high places were also rising, and their smoke was beginning to obscure the light of the one true God he had once known so intimately. He was becoming a stranger to the humble man he had been on that night in Gibeon. As Solomon's heart fractured, a subtle yet profound change occurred. The glory of the Lord, which had once filled the temple like a visible cloud on the day of its dedication, now seemed distant. His prayers, once an intimate dialogue with the Creator, now felt like monologues echoing into the vast silence of heaven. He no longer felt the warmth of that divine presence, only the cold formality of ritual. Wealth continued to pour in, piling up in his storehouses, but his soul grew ever poorer. His hundreds of wives and concubines surrounded him, a tapestry of diverse beauty and charm, but deep within he felt an indescribable loneliness. There was no one who could share the burden of his intellect, no one who could understand the gnawing emptiness that was growing inside him. He tried to fill that void. He threw himself into worldly pursuits with an almost desperate fervor. As he would later write in Ecclesiastes, "Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure." He built grand houses for himself, planted vineyards, and created magnificent gardens and parks filled with every kind of fruit tree. He acquired male and female slaves, amassed singers, and gathered more silver and gold than any king in Jerusalem before him. He had tried everything, but his wisdom, once his greatest blessing, now became his most profound torment. It would not allow him to be fooled by the very things he had created. When he surveyed all that his hands had done, and what he had toiled to achieve, he saw that it was all meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the Sunday. Pleasure was fleeting, wealth brought no satisfaction, and even wisdom brought grief, for with much wisdom comes much sorrow. His splendid palace became a theatre of vanity. The music and laughter could not dispel the silence in his soul. Each new project, each new treasure, only highlighted the unfillable void. He held the world in his hands, but he had lost himself. The deepest longing of his soul was not for more gold or more power, but for the presence of the one he was slowly pushing away. In the silence of heaven, he could hear only the hollow echo of his own heart. The decay within Solomon's soul could not be contained forever. It began to manifest outwardly, gnawing at the peace and stability of his kingdom. The blessings that had once served as a shield for Israel were slowly withdrawn, and cracks began to appear in the walls of prosperity. The consequences of disobedience were no longer a distant warning, but a bitter reality. The Lord had spoken to him. "Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you." The first shadow emerged on the southern border. Hadad the Edomite, a royal descendant who had fled to Egypt when David conquered his land, now returned. Stirred by the Lord and supported by Pharaoh, he became a persistent thorn in Solomon's side, a constant source of harassment and instability. To the north, another adversary arose. Rezon, who had fled from his master, the king of Zobah, gathered a band of men and seized Damascus, establishing a hostile kingdom on Israel's doorstep. These names, once forgotten during Solomon's peaceful reign, now became constant threats, reminding him that the security of his kingdom was not guaranteed. But the gravest threat came from within. A man named Jeroboam, son of Nebat, a talented and ambitious official from the tribe of Ephraim, began to rise. Solomon himself had recognized the man's ability and put him in charge of the entire labor force of the house of Joseph. Jeroboam was capable, but a fire of discontent smoldered within him. One day, as Jeroboam was leaving Jerusalem, he met the prophet Ahijah on the road. Ahijah performed a startling, symbolic act. He took hold of the new cloak he was wearing, tore it into 12 pieces, and gave 10 of them to Jeroboam. "Take 10 pieces for yourself," the prophet declared, "for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give 10 tribes to you." The prophecy was like a hammer blow to the foundation of the United Kingdom. Division was no longer a possibility, it was a decreed certainty. A shadow of schism now loomed directly over the throne. When word of this reached Solomon, he sought to kill Jeroboam, who then fled to the safety of Egypt. The peace Solomon had so carefully constructed throughout his reign was unraveling. He could see the fractures spreading, not because he lacked the wisdom to deal with his enemies, but because he himself had broken the covenant with the source of all peace. The kingdom was failing, not by the might of invading armies, but from the internal collapse of its king's heart. When the final breath left the body of the wisest king the world had ever known, a profound and heavy silence fell upon Jerusalem. The sun that set on Solomon's life also set on an era of unparalleled peace and prosperity. For 40 years, his wisdom had been the anchor of the kingdom, his wealth its adornment, and his name its shield. Now, that anchor was gone. The throne, carved from ivory and overlaid with the purest gold, sat empty, awaiting his successor. But what Solomon left behind was not merely a throne of splendor, but a kingdom whose very foundations were fractured by the compromises of his later years. The golden thread of unity, first woven by the warrior King David and stretched to its limit by his son, was about to snap. His son, Rehoboam, ascended to the throne. He inherited the palace, the treasury, and the title, but he did not inherit the divine wisdom that had once defined his father. He possessed the arrogance of royalty without the humility of a servant. The people of Israel, who had borne the heavy burden of Solomon's grand construction projects, the endless labor, the steep taxes, saw a change of leadership as an opportunity for relief. They gathered before the new king, their voices united in a reasonable plea. "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you." Here was the first test for the new king, a crossroad that would determine the fate of the nation. The elders who had served Solomon, men who had witnessed both his wisdom and his folly, offered sound counsel. They understood the pulse of the people. "If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them," they advised, "and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants." It was a simple truth, an echo of the humility Solomon himself had once possessed. But Rehoboam was a product of the gilded cage. He had grown up surrounded by luxury and the unquestioning obedience of courtiers. He turned away from the wisdom of the old and sought the counsel of the young men who had grown up with him, friends who knew only the language of power and pride. Their advice was steeped in arrogance. "This is what you should tell this people," they urged. "My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions." It was the voice of unchecked power, the antithesis of his grandfather David's heart and his father's initial plea. In that single disastrous decision, Rehoboam chose the path of tyranny over servanthood. He faced the people, his face hard and unyielding, and repeated the foolish, inflammatory words his friends had given him. He mistook fear for respect and dominance for strength. The response was immediate and catastrophic. The people's hope turned to fury. A cry of rebellion, long suppressed, rose from the 10 northern tribes. "What share do we have in David?" they shouted. "What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David." The golden thread snapped. The prophecy of Ahijah, delivered years before on a dusty road outside Jerusalem, had come to pass with chilling precision. The kingdom, built by David's sword and Solomon's wisdom, was torn in two. The price of Solomon's divided heart was now being paid, not by him in his grave, but by his son and by the nation he had left behind. The magnificent edifice of the United Kingdom, whose splendor had dazzled the world, crumbled into dust, not from an outside enemy, but from the weight of its own internal decay, a decay that had begun in the heart of its wisest king. The great unraveling had begun. The tearing of the kingdom was not merely a political schism, it was a deep, spiritual wound from which the nation would never fully recover. The 10 northern tribes, in their fury, rejected the house of David and made Jeroboam their king. Only the tribe of Judah and the small tribe of Benjamin that surrounded Jerusalem remained loyal to Rehoboam. The glorious empire of Solomon was now reduced to 2 rival kingdoms, their shared history now a source of bitterness, their shared border a line of hostility. The dream of a united people under one God was shattered. In the south, Rehoboam ruled from Jerusalem, the city of the great king, still possessing the holy temple. But his kingdom was a shadow of its former self, diminished in size and power, a constant, humbling reminder of his folly. He had inherited the symbol of God's presence, but had lost the heart of the people. In the north, Jeroboam faced a different dilemma. He now ruled over the majority of the tribes, but he knew the people's hearts were still tied to the traditions of their ancestors. The law commanded all men of Israel to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year to worship at the temple. Jeroboam watched as his people made the pilgrimage south, and a cold fear gripped him. He reasoned, "If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, they will again give their allegiance to their Lord, Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam." His fear, born of political insecurity, drove him to commit an act of profound spiritual rebellion, an act that would seal the tragic fate of the northern kingdom for centuries. He was not merely repeating Solomon's mistake of tolerating idolatry. He was institutionalizing it as the state religion. In a desperate attempt to sever the people's ties to Jerusalem, he created a new form of worship, a counterfeit faith. He sought counsel, and then he fashioned 2 golden calves, placing one in Bethel and the other in Dan, at the 2 extremities of his new kingdom. He declared to the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." It was the same blasphemous cry that their ancestors had made at the foot of Mount Sinai, a rejection of the unseen God for an idol they could see and touch. He built shrines on the high places, appointed priests from every class of people, not just Levites, and instituted his own festivals. This was the ultimate, tragic fruition of the seeds Solomon had planted. Solomon had allowed foreign gods into his home and his heart, creating a precedent of divided loyalty. Jeroboam, driven by fear, took that compromise to its horrifying conclusion. He did not just divide his heart, he led an entire nation away from the one true God. The northern kingdom of Israel was born in rebellion and founded upon idolatry. And so, the legacy of Solomon's divided heart was now written across the map of the Promised Land. 2 kingdoms, Judah and Israel, stood in opposition. 2 centers of worship, the temple in Jerusalem and the golden calves in the north, vied for the souls of the people. The covenant that had been the bedrock of their existence was now broken on a national scale. The very wisdom that had built the temple was now overshadowed by the folly that had led to its desecration in the hearts of the majority. One man's slow drift from God had become a nation's catastrophic apostasy. And so, the story of Solomon echoes through the long corridors of time, a haunting melody of what could have been. It is a tale not just of a man, but of a mirror held up to all of humanity. His life serves as a timeless and sobering lesson, asking us a question that transcends ages and empires. What is the true nature of wisdom? Is it the accumulation of knowledge, or the posture of obedience? Solomon remains a figure of profound paradox. He is remembered as the builder of God's holy temple, the sacred space where heaven touched earth. Yet he is also remembered as the king who erected altars to pagan gods on the hills surrounding God's chosen city. He is the author of the timeless wisdom of Proverbs, teaching generations to trust in the Lord with all their heart. Yet he is also the weary, disillusioned voice of Ecclesiastes, who declared all things under the sun to be vanity after chasing them his entire life. His legacy is forever dual. He represents the pinnacle of human potential when blessed by God, and the tragic depth of human failure when that blessing is taken for granted. His fall was not a sudden, dramatic plunge, but a slow, almost imperceptible drift. It was the erosion of a foundation, one small compromise at a time, until the entire magnificent structure could no longer stand. He did not lose his wisdom, but his wisdom lost its soul. It became a tool without a purpose, a light that illuminated his own emptiness. In the end, his story is not just about a king who lost his way. It is about the seductive nature of the world's promises. It asks every soul that chases after wealth, power, pleasure, or even knowledge, to what end? What good is it to gain the whole world, to possess all its treasures and master all its secrets, if in the process you lose the one connection that gives it all meaning? What good is building kingdoms on earth if you lose the kingdom of God within? Let Solomon's life teach us the lesson he learned too late. It is not how grandly your journey begins that ultimately matters, but how faithfully you finish. The greatest danger is not outright rebellion, but a slow, comfortable drift, a heart that becomes so full of the world's gifts that it no longer has room for the giver. May we not wait until our final moments to recognize what truly matters. So today, wherever you are, whatever you are chasing, pause. Ask yourself, is my heart wholly devoted to God? Am I building for eternity or just for today? Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey through the final chapter of Solomon's life. If this message spoke to your heart, please reflect on its warning. Subscribe to our channel and share this story with someone who needs this timeless reminder. It helps us continue spreading the truth of God's word. May you walk in wisdom, not the wisdom of this world, but the wisdom that begins and ends with the fear of the Lord. Stay faithful, stay watchful, and may your finish be far greater than your beginning. God bless you.